They murdered my well, poured concrete into my private, perfectly legal water source like it was toxic waste. All because Meredith Sloan, our HOA president with a clipboard and a god complex, decided my independence threatened her little cookie-cutter kingdom. She grinned while they destroyed it, called it a necessary precaution. I call it war. And I don't lose wars to petty tyrants in yoga pants. Here's how I nuked her empire. If you've ever tangled with an HOA that thinks it's the FBI, stick around and tell me in the comments what's the most absurd thing your HOA has done. But let me rewind 6 months to show you how this whole nightmare began. Fresh off selling my startup, I bought a cash house in Riverside Heights for peace. Big mistake. As a civil engineer who designs water systems for luxury resorts, I built a well that was my masterpiece, self-sufficient, pristine, beautiful. Then Meredith showed up. I had just moved into this beautiful community of 50 homes nestled in the Colorado Springs foothills. My $800,000 house, paid in cash, was supposed to be my sanctuary where I could focus on freelance engineering projects. After 8 years of corporate meetings and micromanagement, going freelance was the best decision I ever made. 6 figures working half the hours, designing systems that actually mattered. The first thing I decided to do was build myself the perfect well. Not just any well. This was going to be my engineering masterpiece, a showcase of everything I had learned about sustainable water systems. I built that well like a declaration of independence. Cleaner than city water, beautiful as a work of art. LED lights created this cool blue glow when darkness fell, and an automated control panel monitored water quality every second. The granite rim caught sunlight perfectly during the day, and at night it looked like something from a luxury resort. I had lived in many places, worked on projects worth millions, but I had never really owned anything that was truly mine. This well, dug, designed, and installed by my own hands, was the first time I had something that belonged completely to me. Standing next to it with a cold glass of the cleanest water I had ever tasted, I felt like I had finally found my place in the world. That's when I met Meredith Sloan. Enter Meredith Sloan, recently divorced, rolling in settlement cash, and starving for control. The moment she saw my well, her smile froze. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about envy. And she had an HOA gavel to swing. She showed up at my door 3 days after I finished the well, carrying a welcome basket filled with expensive cookies and wearing the kind of perfect makeup and outfit that screamed, I have nothing better to do than worry about what my neighbors think. She was 42, recently divorced from some hotshot Denver lawyer, and had used her $2.5 million settlement to buy the most expensive house in our community. What I didn't know then was that Meredith was used to being the center of attention, the queen bee who organized charity events and social clubs back when she was a trophy wife. Losing that status in a very public, very messy divorce had left her desperately needing to control something, anything, to feel powerful again. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Meredith, your HOA president. I just had to come see this amazing while everyone's talking about." She walked around it slowly, her expression shifting from curiosity to something that looked uncomfortably like envy. "You're an architect?" she asked, clearly impressed despite herself. "Civil engineer," I replied, pulling up the monitoring app on my phone to show her the real-time water quality data. "I design water systems for resorts and luxury developments. This uses advanced filtration technology. The water coming out is 10 times cleaner than city water." I was genuinely excited to share my work with someone, especially a neighbor who seemed interested. But then her expression changed completely. "Oh, that's interesting," she said, her voice taking on a cooler tone. "You know, here in Riverside Heights, we really value simplicity, harmony with the community." I felt the first warning bell go off in my head. "Harmony with nature is good," I said. "This is sustainable living at its finest." She gave me that cold smile again. "I meant harmony with the community, Mason. We like things to flow smoothly around here." The way she emphasized smoothly made my skin crawl. The granite rim gleamed in the afternoon sun, the LED system created beautiful underwater patterns, and I proudly demonstrated the smartphone app that let me check real-time readings of pH, temperature, purity. But instead of appreciating the innovation, Meredith stood there with her arms crossed, her expression shifting from admiration to something that looked distinctly like jealousy. Very impressive, she said in a tone that made it clear she didn't mean it as a compliment. I'm sure all this technology makes you feel quite special. It's not about feeling special, I said, starting to get defensive. It's about sustainability and water independence. This system could serve as a model for other homes in the community. That was apparently the wrong thing to say because her smile became even colder. Independence, she repeated slowly. That's an interesting word choice. Here in Riverside Heights, we believe in interdependence, community standards, working together toward common goals. The way she said independence made it sound like a dirty word. As she left, she turned back with that same frozen smile and said, "Oh, Mason, there's an HOA meeting next week. You should definitely attend." Something about the way she said it made me realize this wasn't a friendly invitation. It was a warning. I watched her walk back to her pristine house, noting how she kept glancing back at my well with an expression I couldn't quite read. Her house was perfect, sterile, exactly like every other house on the block except for the expensive landscaping that probably cost more than most people's cars. If I had known then what I know now, I would have started recording everything from that moment. At the HOA meeting, I walked into a firing squad. Meredith unveiled 15 brand new rules crafted to kill my well. Lights? Banned. Granite rim? Excessive. Real-time water data? A community eyesore. When I objected, dead silence. Neighbors stared at their shoes. That's when I realized Meredith didn't just want compliance. She wanted surrender. The meeting was held in the community center, a bland beige room that somehow managed to suck all personality out of the air. I showed up expecting the usual boring discussions about landscaping budgets and mailbox maintenance. Instead, I walked into what felt like a carefully orchestrated ambush. Meredith stood at the front of the room with a thick folder of papers, that same cold smile plastered across her face, addressing maybe 20 homeowners who all seemed determined to avoid eye contact with me. "Before we discuss our regular business," she announced, "I'm pleased to present some important new community guidelines that were approved last week." My stomach dropped as she began reading off a list of 15 new regulations. Each line felt like a personal attack disguised as community improvement, designed specifically to dismantle everything I had built. The room was dead silent except for Meredith's voice, and I realized with growing horror that every single person there knew exactly what was happening. I stood up, trying to keep my voice level and professional. "Excuse me, but I need to object to these retroactive regulations. When I purchased my home and built my well, I followed all existing HOA guidelines and obtained proper permits from the county. Creating new rules specifically to target completed projects seems problematic." I looked around the room hoping for support, but what I saw made my heart sink. An elderly man stared down at his hands, refusing to meet my eyes. A middle-aged woman turned her face away completely. A younger couple suddenly became very interested in studying their phones. Not one person defended me. Not one voice questioned the obvious targeting. In that moment, I understood they didn't support Meredith's actions, but they were more afraid of her than they were outraged by injustice. Meredith's smile grew wider, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "I appreciate your concerns, Mason, but we have to ensure that everything in our community remains safe and appropriate. I'm sure you understand." The way she paused before saying appropriate made it clear that my well was anything but appropriate in her mind. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly bothered by what they were witnessing, but too intimidated to speak up.
Safe? I couldn't help but raise my voice slightly. I'm a licensed civil engineer with full insurance coverage. This is professional grade work that exceeds all safety standards. My well system is probably safer than the municipal water supply. I pulled out my phone to show the monitoring data, but Meredith waved her hand dismissively. I don't doubt your expertise, she replied smoothly, but regulations exist for everyone's benefit. No one gets special treatment regardless of their professional background. The meeting continued for another hour, covering mundane topics like garbage pickup schedules and holiday decorations, but I couldn't focus on anything except the growing realization that I had somehow made an enemy without even trying. After everyone filed out, I approached Meredith directly, hoping that a private conversation might help us find some reasonable middle ground. Look, I don't want any trouble, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I just want to live quietly and work on my projects. Can we find some way to work this out? She gathered her papers slowly, deliberately making me wait for her response, like a supplicant seeking an audience with royalty. Of course we can work it out, Mason, she said finally, her voice dripping with false sweetness. All you have to do is follow the rules like everyone else. It's really quite simple. But these rules didn't exist when I built the well, I said, making one final attempt to appeal to basic fairness. You can't just change the rules retroactively to target one person's property. She looked at me with the kind of condescending expression usually reserved for particularly slow children. The community evolves, Mason. Our standards have to evolve too. I'm sure a smart engineer like you can figure out how to adapt. The way she said adapt made it clear she meant surrender completely. What followed was the most frustrating month of my adult life. Meredith launched a systematic campaign of harassment disguised as community standards enforcement. Every single day brought a new violation notice, each one more ridiculous than the last. They fined me for towels, tomatoes, trash bins. Every small act became a new violation. Meanwhile, my neighbor's holiday lights stayed up all summer, untouched. Not a single notice. The pattern became clear quickly. Meredith was walking through my property with a measuring tape and magnifying glass, looking for any possible violation while completely ignoring identical or worse infractions at other houses. I became a surveillance machine, documenting everything with photos and timestamps, building a case file that showed the obvious targeting. My neighbor directly across the street had Christmas lights up year-round, which violated at least 3 HOA rules, but somehow never received a single notice. The house next to his had a garden twice the size of mine with vegetables growing right up to the property line, but apparently that was perfectly acceptable. Meanwhile, I was being fined $75 for hanging a single towel to dry and $100 for tomatoes that were technically 6 inches too close to my fence line. By the end of the third week, I had accumulated over $1,200 in fines, all for violations so petty that they would have been ignored at any reasonable property. I tried calling the HOA management company, hoping to speak with someone rational, but was told that all enforcement decisions went through the community president, meaning Meredith had absolute power over my life. I consulted with a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, but he declined to take my case after receiving a phone call that he described as a conversation with someone who understands the local landscape very well. That's when I realized Meredith's network extended far beyond our little community. As the ex-wife of a prominent Denver lawyer, she had connections throughout the legal and business community. People who might normally challenge obvious harassment were suddenly finding reasons to avoid getting involved. The breaking point came when I found Mrs. Peterson, my elderly next-door neighbor, slipping a handwritten note into my mailbox late one evening. She looked around nervously before approaching me.
Be careful, dear, she whispered. She has a plan for your well. I heard her on the phone with someone about environmental concerns and emergency measures. The note she left was even more specific. She's been researching ways to have your well declared a contamination risk. I think she's found something that will let her force you to shut it down. Please be careful. Mrs. Peterson had lived in the community for 15 years and had never seen anything like Meredith's systematic targeting of a single resident. That night, while researching municipal water regulations, I stumbled across the city contract that supplied water to our entire community. Buried in the technical language was a clause that caught my attention, Service agreement subject to review and potential suspension in cases of verified environmental violations or community noncompliance with municipal standards. While digging through city records, I found Meredith's trap for herself. One line in our water contract: false environmental claims equal instant service cutoff. She'd faked contamination to kill my well. Now I'd weaponize her lie to kill every faucet in Riverside Heights. It was a standard legal protection that allowed the city to cut off service if a community was found to be violating environmental regulations or misrepresenting their water usage needs. That's when I realized what Meredith was really planning. If she could manufacture some kind of environmental emergency related to my well, she could not only force me to shut it down, but also position herself as the hero who protected the community from a dangerous neighbor. But she had made one crucial miscalculation. I was an engineer who understood systems, and I was about to turn her own system against her in ways she never saw coming. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling outside my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was just road construction or utility work, the kind of thing that happens in any neighborhood. But as I became more alert, I realized the noise was coming from my own front yard. I threw on clothes and rushed outside to find two concrete trucks parked in my driveway and three workers in hard hats standing around my well. My beautiful granite-rimmed well had been wrapped in plastic sheeting and marked with a bright yellow "Danger, Do Not Approach" sign that looked official enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. What the hell is going on here? I shouted, running toward the workers who were already setting up their pumping equipment. The crew chief, a weathered man in his 50s, looked genuinely sympathetic as he handed me a clipboard full of official-looking documents. "Sorry, sir, but we have orders from the HOA to perform emergency environmental remediation. This well has been reported as a potential contamination source, and we're required to seal it immediately." My hands were shaking as I scanned the paperwork, seeing phrases like groundwater contamination risk, immediate public health threat, and emergency action authorized by community safety protocols. "This is insane," I said, trying to keep my voice under control. "This well is cleaner than city water. I have test results, monitoring data, professional certifications. This is completely fabricated." The crew chief shrugged apologetically. "Look, I don't make the decisions. I just follow orders. We've got permits from the county health department and authorization from your HOA board. If you've got a problem with it, you'll need to take it up with them." They buried my masterpiece in gray sludge. The workers moved with practiced efficiency, extending the concrete pump's hose and positioning it directly over my well opening. I kept recording, capturing every moment of the process while trying to argue with officials who seemed genuinely convinced they were protecting public safety. The whole operation took less than 2 hours, transforming my beautiful, functional well into an ugly concrete monument to Meredith's ruthlessness. 25 feet of carefully planned depth disappeared under an avalanche of gray concrete that would harden into permanent destruction. And then, just as the last of the concrete was being poured, Meredith herself appeared, walking across my lawn with that same sweet smile she had worn during our first meeting. "Oh, Mason, I'm so sorry about all this," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I know how proud you were of your little project, but sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good." "You fabricated this entire emergency," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You know as well as I do that my well was perfectly safe. This is harassment, pure and simple." Meredith's mask slipped just slightly, revealing a flash of the cold calculation underneath her neighborly facade. "That's a very serious accusation, Mason. I hope you're not suggesting that county health officials would participate in some kind of conspiracy. That sounds almost paranoid." She emphasized the word paranoid the same way she had during the HOA meeting, like she was diagnosing a mental illness. "What I'm suggesting," I replied, still recording, "is that you've made the biggest mistake of your life." She laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Mistake? I think I've solved a problem that was making everyone in the neighborhood uncomfortable." Now you can join the rest of civilized society and use municipal water like a normal person. That night, I sat in my home office, staring at the footage I had captured, watching Meredith's performance over and over again. Her words kept echoing in my mind. Now you can join the rest of civilized society. She thought she had won, that she had broken my spirit and forced me into submission like any other troublesome resident. But Meredith Sloan had made one crucial miscalculation. She had targeted an engineer who understood exactly how systems worked, including the system that kept her perfect little community supplied with water. I spent hours digging through municipal records and city contracts, looking for any leverage I could use against someone who seems to control every official channel in our community. That's when I found the golden ticket buried in the fine print of Riverside Heights' water service agreement with Colorado Springs. One fake pollution claim, and the city could pull the plug. Not maybe, instantly. It was designed to protect the city from liability if a community was found to be misrepresenting environmental conditions or filing fraudulent safety reports. Meredith's fake contamination report wasn't just harassment. It was exactly the kind of false environmental reporting that could trigger a service suspension. I realized I needed to be strategic about this. Going to the authorities with accusations of harassment would be my word against hers, and she had already proven her ability to manipulate official channels. But if I could get her to admit on record that she had fabricated the contamination report, I would have concrete evidence of fraud that the city couldn't ignore. I needed to make her feel safe enough to brag about her victory, confident enough to reveal how she had pulled off her master plan. I decided to invite her over for what I called a peace negotiation. I sent her a text message saying that I was ready to discuss reasonable compromises and that I hoped we could find a way to move forward as good neighbors. Her response came back within minutes. Of course, Mason. I've always believed that reasonable people can work things out. How about tomorrow afternoon in your backyard? The speed of her reply and the exclamation points told me everything I needed to know. She was eager to celebrate her victory and probably curious about how thoroughly she had broken my spirit. I spent that evening carefully setting up recording equipment around my patio area. I positioned a small camera inside a decorative planter and placed a backup audio recorder inside my outdoor speaker system. I wanted multiple angles and redundant recording in case something went wrong with the technology. The next afternoon, she arrived right on time, wearing a flowing sundress and carrying a bottle of expensive wine, like we were old friends getting together for a social visit. Mason, she said warmly, giving me an air kiss like we hadn't been engaged in psychological warfare for months. I am so glad you reached out. I've been hoping we could put all this unpleasantness behind us. She settled into one of my patio chairs, looking completely relaxed and confident, like a general surveying a conquered battlefield. I have to admit, I said, playing my part carefully, you really outmaneuvered me with the whole environmental thing. I never saw that coming. Her eyes lit up with genuine pleasure at the compliment. Well, sometimes you have to think creatively when dealing with difficult situations. I've learned that people respond better to official authority than to simple requests. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled back in her chair, clearly enjoying the opportunity to explain her brilliance to the defeated enemy. How did you even know to use environmental concerns? I asked, trying to sound like an impressed student learning from a master. I mean, that was incredibly effective. Meredith practically preened at the praise. Oh, Mason, you'd be amazed what you can accomplish when you understand how these systems work. I've been involved in community management for years, and I've learned that environmental safety is the one thing that makes officials act immediately, no questions asked. She took a sip of wine and continued. All it took was one phone call to a friend who understands how to write convincing reports. A friend, I prompted, trying to keep my voice casual while my heart pounded with excitement. That's genius. So the contamination report was. She waved her hand dismissively. $500 to someone who knows how to make things sound official and scary. Worth every penny for the results. She gestured toward the concrete plug where my well used to be. Sometimes you have to invest in solutions, you know? I could barely contain my excitement as she continued digging her own grave. The best part, she said, warming to her subject, is that everyone thinks I'm the hero who protected the neighborhood from a dangerous situation. They have no idea how easy it was to manufacture the whole crisis. She laughed, clearly delighted with her own cleverness. I mean, you had to know that having your own water source made everyone else feel inadequate, like you were showing off or something. Nobody wants to live next to someone who thinks they're better than the rest of us. So this was really about the well making me stand out too much? I asked, giving her the opportunity to fully incriminate herself. Oh, absolutely, she replied without hesitation. If I let one person have their own private water source, pretty soon everyone would want one. Then who would pay for the municipal water system? The whole community structure would fall apart. I had to nip that in the bud before it became a trend. She raised her wine glass in a mock toast to community standards and the people who enforce them. As she left that afternoon, still glowing with satisfaction from her confession, I sat on my patio reviewing the perfect footage I had captured. Meredith had just handed me everything I needed to destroy her credibility and potentially face criminal charges for filing false reports. But more importantly, she had given me the leverage to turn her own weapon against her. That evening, I made a phone call to the Colorado Springs Water Department and asked to speak with someone about reporting a serious violation of their service contract. I need to report fraudulent environmental claims that may have compromised the integrity of your community service agreements, I told the supervisor, and I have video evidence to support my claims. 48 hours later, Riverside Heights went dry. Showers stopped. Coffee machines died. Phones exploded. Meredith's kingdom was suddenly a desert, and I held the only water. Within 48 hours of my call to the water department, everything changed. I had submitted Meredith's recorded confession along with a detailed written complaint documenting the pattern of harassment and fraudulent reporting. The city took false environmental claims very seriously, especially when they involved manipulating county health officials and potentially exposing the municipality to liability. By Thursday morning, every house in Riverside Heights received an official notice. Water Service temporarily suspended pending investigation of contract violations and false reporting. Estimated restoration pending resolution of investigation. The first phone call came at 7:15 in the morning, then another at 7:20. By 8 o'clock, my phone was ringing nonstop with panicked neighbors demanding to know what was happening and why they suddenly had no water for showers, coffee, or basic daily needs. The beautiful thing was that I had nothing to do with the decision. I had simply reported documented fraud to the appropriate authorities and let the system work exactly as it was designed. Meredith had weaponized environmental regulations against me, and now those same regulations were being used to hold the entire community accountable for her deception. At the emergency meeting, I played her confession. The rage in that room? Nuclear. Her reign ended with a unanimous vote, and my well became a monument to her downfall. The emergency HOA meeting was called for that evening, and the community center was packed with angry, unwashed residents who had spent the day dealing with the reality of life without running water. I arrived early and set up my laptop and portable projector, knowing that this would be my one chance to present the evidence clearly and completely. The mood in the room was electric with frustration and confusion, with most people still unclear about exactly what had triggered the water shutdown. Meredith sat in the front row, looking pale and shaken, but still trying to maintain her composure and authority. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice slightly strained. We're dealing with an unfortunate situation that appears to be the result of a misunderstanding with the city water department. I'm confident we can resolve this quickly once we clarify a few administrative details. She was trying to frame the crisis as a bureaucratic mix-up, something that could be smoothed over with the right phone calls and explanations. But I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized that her carefully constructed world was starting to collapse. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, feeling dozens of frustrated eyes following my movement. Actually, there's no misunderstanding, I said, connecting my laptop to the projector. The water was shut off because the city discovered that false environmental reports were filed against my property, which constitutes fraud and violates the community service contract. A murmur went through the crowd as people began to understand that this wasn't a simple administrative error. What I'm about to show you, I continued, is video footage of our HOA president admitting that she paid $500 for a fabricated contamination report that she used to destroy my well and manipulate county officials. The room went dead silent as I started the video, and Meredith's voice filled the space. $500 to someone who knows how to make things sound official and scary. Worth every penny for the results. You could have heard a pin drop as the recording continued, capturing her casual admission of fraud and her satisfaction at manufacturing a crisis that endangered the entire community's water supply. When the video finished, the room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding explanations, and expressing outrage at being dragged into Meredith's personal vendetta. "You lied to all of us," shouted one neighbor. "My kids couldn't take baths last night because of your fake emergency," yelled another. Mrs. Peterson stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "You made us all accomplices to your harassment campaign. We trusted you to protect our community, and instead you put everyone at risk." Meredith tried desperately to maintain control, standing up and raising her hands for quiet. "Now let's all calm down and think about this rationally," she said, but her voice was trembling and her usual authority had completely evaporated. "Mason has obviously edited this recording to make it sound worse than it was. We can't base important decisions on potentially manipulated evidence." But the crowd wasn't buying her denials, especially when I played the recording a second time, showing the unedited footage with timestamps and metadata clearly visible. I move that we vote immediately to remove Meredith Sloan as HOA president, called out one homeowner. Second, came voices from around the room. The vote was swift and decisive, 48 in favor of removal, with only Meredith voting against her own removal. She sat alone in the front row as the community she had terrorized turned completely against her, finally understanding the extent of her deception and manipulation. But the community also realized they needed immediate action to restore their water service. "Mason," said Mrs. Peterson, "you understand these systems better than any of us. Can you help us fix this mess?" I had anticipated this request and already prepared a detailed action plan. I've already contacted the water department and provided them with evidence that the false reports came from one individual acting without community authorization, I explained. They're willing to restore service within 24 hours once we submit a formal disavowal of Meredith's actions and commit to full cooperation with their investigation. The paperwork was drawn up and signed that night, with Meredith's signature notably absent from the community resolution. As people filed out of the meeting, many stopped to apologize for not speaking up during the months of harassment. "We should have said something," admitted one neighbor. "We all knew what she was doing was wrong, but nobody wanted to be her next target." Another resident added, "She made it clear that anyone who opposed her would face the same treatment you got. We were all scared of her." As the room cleared, Meredith sat alone, surrounded by empty chairs and the wreckage of her carefully constructed authority. She looked up at me with an expression of pure hatred and hissed, "This isn't over, Mason. I'll sue you, I'll sue the community, I'll sue everyone involved in this witch hunt." But her threats sounded hollow and desperate, the ranting of someone who had just discovered that their victims could fight back effectively. "Good luck with that," I replied calmly. "Everything I did was legal and documented. Can you say the same?" The next morning, I woke up to the sound of water flowing through pipes again. True to their word, the city had restored service to Riverside Heights after receiving our formal disavowal of Meredith's fraudulent actions and our commitment to cooperate fully with their investigation. I stood in my kitchen, listening to the familiar sound of running water and feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice finally being served. The community had learned an important lesson about the dangers of unchecked authority, and Meredith was about to learn that actions have consequences. Within a week, the legal ramifications began piling up. The county health department launched an investigation into the false contamination report, which could result in criminal charges for filing fraudulent government documents. The city water department was pursuing civil penalties for contract violations and the costs associated with the emergency service suspension. Most importantly for the community, Meredith was required to pay $15,000 in compensation for my destroyed well, plus additional funds to cover the community's legal fees and administrative costs related to the water shutdown. But the financial penalties were nothing compared to the social consequences. Riverside Heights had a 30-day notice requirement for major changes in residence, and Meredith was essentially forced to put her house on the market immediately. Word of her deception had spread throughout the community and beyond, making it impossible for her to maintain any credibility or authority. The neighbors who had once smiled politely at her morning walks now turned away or openly glared when she appeared. The charity organizations she had once dominated wanted nothing to do with someone who had been exposed as a fraud and a bully. I used the compensation money wisely, hiring a professional drilling company to create a new well that was even better than my original design. This one went down 30 feet, had an expanded 5-layer filtration system, and included a backup solar array that could power multiple households if needed. But instead of keeping this resource to myself, I designed the system with multiple access points that allowed my immediate neighbors to connect their own lines for emergency water or simply because they preferred the cleaner, better tasting well water to the municipal supply. Mrs. Peterson was the first to take advantage of the shared water system, and soon 2 other families had connected as well. What had started as Meredith's attempt to force conformity and eliminate my independence had actually created a small network of neighbors who were now more self-sufficient and connected than ever before. Children played around the new well area, which I had landscaped with native Colorado plants and comfortable seating. The space became an informal community gathering spot, the exact opposite of the sterile uniformity that Meredith had tried to enforce. The investigation into Meredith's actions revealed a pattern of abuse that extended far beyond my situation. Other residents came forward with stories of selective enforcement, retroactive rule changes, and intimidation tactics that had made their lives miserable. The county attorney's office was building a case that could result in serious criminal charges, including fraud, harassment, and abuse of authority. Meredith's attempts to hire high-powered legal representation were complicated by the fact that her ex-husband's law firm wanted nothing to do with her case, and other attorneys were reluctant to defend someone with such clear video evidence against them. 6 months later, I was working in my home office when I received an email that made me smile. The subject line read information regarding applicant Meredith Sloan, and it came from the HOA management company of a community in Denver where Meredith had apparently tried to start fresh. Attached was the video footage from our community center meeting, along with news articles about the investigation and a simple note. Thought you should know what kind of person is applying for our board position. Her application had been rejected immediately without even the courtesy of an interview. Meredith wanted cookie-cutter conformity. Instead, my well's now shared by neighbors. We have solar panels, community gardens, everything she hated. Her crusade for control created the exact innovative community she feared. That's the sweetest revenge, winning by building what they tried to destroy. The beautiful irony was that Meredith's attempt to destroy my independence and force me into conformity had actually strengthened my position in the community and created exactly the kind of collaborative, innovative neighborhood that she had tried to prevent. The shared well system had inspired other residents to explore solar panels, community gardens, and other sustainable living initiatives. We had accidentally created the kind of forward-thinking, environmentally conscious community that attracted exactly the type of residents who valued innovation over conformity. On a warm evening in late summer, I was sitting by the new well with Mrs. Peterson and a few other neighbors, watching children play in the gathering dusk while we discussed plans for a community greenhouse project. The LED lights in the well created their familiar underwater glow, and you could hear the quiet hum of the solar powered filtration system doing its work. You know, Mrs. Peterson said Meredith thought she was protecting property values by keeping everything the same, but this community is worth more now than it ever was when she was in charge. She was right. The innovative water system, the collaborative spirit, and the reputation for standing up to bullies had made Riverside Heights an attractive destination for exactly the kind of neighbors you actually want to live around. Property values had increased, but more importantly, the quality of life had improved dramatically. People felt free to pursue their own projects and improvements without fear of arbitrary punishment or selective enforcement of rules designed to maintain someone else's vision of perfection. The community had evolved from Meredith's sterile dictatorship into something organic and alive. As I sat there that evening, listening to the quiet sounds of a healthy community and watching the last traces of sunlight reflect off clean water flowing from deep underground, I realized that Meredith had actually done me a favor. Her attacks had forced me to become more engaged with my neighbors, more creative in my solutions, and more committed to the principles of fairness and innovation that made communities thrive. Sometimes the best response to people who try to tear you down is simply to build something better than what they tried to destroy. Engineers understand that pressure creates diamonds, and Meredith's pressure had created something more valuable than she could have imagined. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the well with its LED lights glowing softly in the twilight, surrounded by laughing children and content neighbors. Then I looked up at the stars appearing in the clear Colorado sky and said quietly, "Thanks for the lesson, Meredith." Sometimes the best way to deal with people who want to control everything is to show them what freedom actually looks like. The final irony was it lost on me. Meredith had declared war on my independence and ended up creating the most independent, innovative community in the entire area. She had tried to force conformity and accidentally built a neighborhood where creativity thrived. She had attempted to eliminate my well and instead inspired a water sharing network that brought neighbors together. Her $500 lie had cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her home, and her future. My engineering masterpiece had been murdered and reborn stronger than ever. The concrete she poured into my first well had become the foundation for something she never saw coming. In the end, Meredith Sloan learned the hard way that when you go to war with an engineer, you better make sure you understand the system you're trying to break. Because engineers don't just fix problems, we build solutions that make the original problem irrelevant. That's a lesson worth remembering, whether you're dealing with a petty HOA tyrant or anyone else who thinks they can crush innovation with bureaucracy and fear. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's building something so much better that your enemies become irrelevant. QA stories where reality feels like fiction and fiction wishes it was this juicy. Hit that like before the next bombshell drops.